Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from the Wide Left Substack. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, typically this is when I ask you a question and try to throw you off a little bit, but instead, I'd just like to congratulate you on the reception to your piece about the Draft Network. What a fantastic article. And in case this is their first time listening to this show as a result of subscribing, hi, welcome to Norse Code.
Hi, hello. Also, thank you for the kind words. I didn't expect that.
Well, see, I was planning on throwing you off that way instead. So it's still,
there you go. Mission accomplished.
It still like works in canon. Like it's like my character is still being true, I suppose. So everyone, including Ian Rappaport, ended up retweeting out your article. Is anything like? I guess I don't even know how to express how cool that must have felt to just go, oh wow, everyone is now looking at this.
Yeah, there's like a little bit of act like you've been there before kind of element where like my brain is like, no, I mean, you're like a professional reporter. This is normal. Ian Rappaport has actually followed you for a little bit. You should be comfortable with this. And then I saw the quote tweet like hit my notifications, and I was like, oh, I'll just do a Tiger Woods fist bump, and I yelled in the house, right? Like, this is like during the workday, right? I'm not the only person who works from home in this house.
Like a Howard Dean style kerplah, like,
yeah, it's like, yeah, like I was in it to win it, right? Like I was here for it, and someone else was on a video call with the client, so worth it, I think. But also that happened. But yeah, it was crazy because like I was so anxious, and we've got a little section of the podcast in a little bit that we'll talk a little bit more in detail about it. But I was so anxious about the reception that this was received because of the amount of work and effort I put into this that I was like overjoyed that it ended up getting to a lot of people for a lot of reasons. So really happy about that. It was a really great moment. It feels like I'm back, right? Like I'm MJ and I'm faxing back that I'm back. Like it felt good. It felt good.
I enjoyed that you and I were actually messaging at the time when the rap sheet thing came out. Like we were joking about something completely different, about an offer that had come in. We get offers for podcast networks all the time, and it involves ads, and we don't do ads famously. Remember that for next week. And so I was messaging you about that around the time that the rap sheet thing came in. And I loved your response. I was like, dude, rap sheet, congratulations. And you were like, I am on a motorcycle headed straight to the sun. Like,
oh, yeah. Yeah, it is a thing I said.
yeah, this
it was an exciting moment. It felt good.
Fantastic. Well, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are all doing well. It is, again, the off season. We're doing this about every 2-ish weeks or so. Right now, we're ramping up for draft coverage, so look forward to that. We have plenty of stuff to talk about, including the Minnesota Vikings traded up with the Texans in order to get their pick, and we'll be talking about kind of their plans and everything that's involved in that in just a few minutes. We also have some signings and some discussion on tampering, because Kirk Cousins, bless his heart, I suppose I can say that since he's living down south now, bless his heart, is just so honest that he may have spilled the beans on some tampering issues with the Falcons. We also have a little bit on the Draft Network and the mailbag as well. But before we start, again, thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. If you enjoy the show and would like to financially help us out a little bit, you can go over to patreon.com/Norse Code and join up there for $3.50 a month, or a little less for the year subscription. You get access to bonus episodes, which another one just got put out. You can also get access to the Discord, which has plenty of fun, and we were doing basically a live watch along for the 2 JMU games over the last couple of days, which was a lot of fun. Less fun for the second one, admittedly. I
didn't enjoy that, but we did have someone in the Discord say I haven't been this sad since the last time I watched the Vikings, which tells me we picked the right team.
Exactly. As it turns out, we're on the right train. despite the fact their coach is now in Villanova. I think JMU is getting like gifted like $500,000 for it, so there is that. But so yeah,
they'll be fine.
Yeah, they'll survive. The Dukes are it's the Dukes against everybody, quite frankly. So, but Patreon.com/Norse Code, all of that and more. Head over there, check it out. We have a special thank you to the following people who just subscribed. Matheson Muir, thank you so much. Mike, and there's not really a name on this one. It's just UND Sports Talk. So apologies if I didn't grab the name on this one, but
that rules.
Yeah. Hey, Grand Forks people stick together or whatever, appreciate it so much. UND Sports Talk, thank you. And I'm looking forward to watching
Did the Gophers make the tournament?
Yes, Gophers made the tournament. UND also did. UND is.
I know UND did. I follow UND hockey. Come on.
Well, yes, obviously, but UND is playing in a section of the bracket with all Michigan teams.
Oh my gosh! Yeah. Oh yeah, this is like they use like an RPI style, like all the at-larges get in, and then a computer just determines the rest, right?
Kind of, yeah.
And the computer's biased for Michigan-based teams.
Clearly, yes. So 3 Michigan teams made it, and all of them are playing each other at UND. So that stuff starts out on Friday. I'm looking forward to that. I'll probably be posting an obnoxious amount on Good Friday in the Discord about that. So check it out. Also, paypal.me/Norse Code as well for a one-time donation. Or you can go over to our Threadless store at norsecode.threadless.com and pick up any number of wonderful Norse Code items. All right, all of that aside, let's get into the episode. And shortly after, while we were recording, the Vikings signed Sam Darnold. I'm keeping that in because I think it's funny.
Wow.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, that actually works really well.
Yes, it turns out. Well, they didn't trade the farm for him, though. That was the thing. But the Vikings traded picks with the Texans. The Vikings acquired the number 23 overall pick in the first round and the number 232 selection, which is in the 7th. The Texans get 42 overall in the second round, number 188 6th round, and a second round pick in 2025, per Ian Rappaport and Tom Pelissaro. Minnesota has obviously announced the trade and everything, confirmed it. This is where we're at. The Vikings appear to be on the move and discussing trying to get into that top 4. And because it is this time of year, the news reports out of the teams outside of Chicago are all talking about, yes, they are absolutely open to a trade, and no, there's absolutely no way they're going to go into a trade. I suppose the question I want to ask is actually best summed up by Roro, who asked, what's the thinking behind trading up with Houston now, and is there a benefit beyond waiting to closer to the draft and trading up into the top 5?
So I think that there's 2 elements here. One is that this is effectively a 3-team trade that Houston just became an early party to, and they don't know who the other element of that party is. But whoever the Vikings want to trade with, and I imagine they had conversations with the Patriots and Washington and the Cardinals, right? Whoever the Vikings want to trade with, and maybe all 3 of those teams, aren't that interested in like a second and a third and a sixth and whatever, right? They're not interested in having 80 picks in the draft, but they want valuable picks. And so they don't want to go through the trouble of acquiring a bunch of picks and then repackaging those during the draft when there's only 15 minutes per pick while a player is sliding and a team doesn't know whether or not they want to make the trade. They'd rather just have the first. So I think that this is just an element of getting like a 3-team trade together before the actual trade gets together. So I think that that's like kind of the thing. And then the second part of that, like, why would the Vikings do this now instead of during the draft, is first, I mean, it is like pretty tough to execute a trade during the draft for a team that's like not on the clock. There's not like any logistical or mechanical thing preventing that from happening. It just doesn't seem to happen very often. And I think that the reason is because teams are constantly just like on the move when they're not on the clock, and then they're waiting to see what's happening when they are on the clock. And so it would have been probably the time pressure with the Texans would have made it somewhat difficult. And then organizing a 3-team trade during the draft would have been nearly impossible. And then on top of that, the price probably goes up. So if you take a look at the 4 trade charts, right, where the Vikings and the Texans trade gets evaluated, whether that's Jimmy Johnson or the Rich Hill historically derived chart or the approximate value chart, developed by Chase Stewart, often credited to Harvard Sports Analytics Collective, who did also do an approximate value chart, but later, and it's basically the same chart, or the Fitzgerald Spielberger chart based off of the contract values of the second contracts that each pick slot has signed. The Vikings lose all of them by value, which is really rare. Usually it's like two one way and two the other, right? Usually, you win one chart and you lose the other chart, right? Like I think with the Vikings trade with the Lions, it was a pretty significant loss by the market oriented charts, right? The Jimmy Johnson and the Rich Hill chart. But by the analytics charts, that's actually a win for the Vikings. Now, obviously, no one won that trade because the players that came out of it were like Lewis Cine and Jameson Williams. But in terms of like the theoretical value, the Vikings won the analytics, the data, the results, the process-oriented one. But in terms of the market, the Vikings lost. So that's usually what ends up happening is that one team wins two of the charts and the other team wins the other two charts. That didn't happen here. The Vikings lost all of them. And so one might look at that and be like, well, okay, if that's the case, then why do the Vikings have to pay so much? Well, this is a quarterback trade. They just won't be able to pick a quarterback at 23. And the Texans know that. The Texans know that this is a quarterback trade. And historically, when a trade involving a quarterback happens, that costs more because the teams that are selling it know that the team is desperate for a quarterback. The team that's buying it knows that they'll do anything, not anything, but they'll pay a lot for a quarterback specifically. And so it costs a lot. And the Texans know that this is all as part of an effort to get a quarterback. At least that's my interpretation. Technically, we don't know that. But my interpretation is that the reason that price was relatively very steep is because it's for a quarterback. And so that's why all of that happens, right? Hard to do 3-team trades, period. Hard to do 3-team trades during the draft when there's time pressure, and hard to do any trades with teams that are not on the clock. So I think that's why they got this Texans win out of the way early. And I think that that's kind of why, the Texans would agree to this because they win by every conceivable metric. They could trade back into the first and still have like picks left over from this trade. Like it's going to be a net win for them. Almost no matter what they do. Obviously they could like screw up the trade values or whatever, but that doesn't mean they're out a first round pick. So there's a lot of reasons that a lot of these teams would do this now as opposed to later.
So we have this in front of us now. I guess the real question is which team ends up being the better trade partner?
Yeah, well, if you take a look at what these teams have said, right? You take a look at what Washington has said, what New England has said, and what Arizona has said. Let's focus on those teams. Arizona very much is like, hey, please God, trade for our pick. We'll do anything, man. I think what Monty Austinfort, the general manager, was like, there's a neon sign that says we're open for business. That's crazy that he said that, by the way. But, that's like the whole, that one is going to be the cheapest one to get. Right. And that makes sense. Whoever is trading up to that pick is either getting the third best or the fourth best quarterback, but whoever is left over from the other quarterbacks after they've been picked through. So that one's going to be cheap. And the Cardinals themselves are not in the market for a quarterback. Washington and New England are. And so typically when you're like trading up in the draft, when like, remember the Washington trade with the Rams to get RG3, typically when you're trading up into the draft, you're competing against other quarterback needy teams. So Washington is competing against whoever else needed a quarterback back in 2012, maybe Seattle, right? I just remember because they also picked a quarterback and ended up starting him. But like, or Miami, right? That creates, that market, that additional demand creates those prices. But when that includes the team that holds the pick, that price is going to be higher. So that's something to kind of keep in mind is that, ideally the Vikings, top quarterback, or I guess probably their second quarterback, because Caleb Williams is likely everyone's top quarterback, and he's almost certainly going number one. So the top quarterback remaining, the hope is that that guy slips past Washington and New England, and then the Vikings can trade with the Cardinals for that guy. That'd be a crazy good scenario, right? Pretty unlikely, I think. So Washington has said, hey, We are certainly, capable of picking here. We want to pick here. But, we'll listen to anything. We're not locked in. We want to make sure that we get good value for this. We'll entertain any calls. And New England has basically said the same thing in slightly stronger language, I guess. But like, it very much seems like, that's what's happening. My reading of everything is that A, all three of these teams are very comfortable with the concept of trading out of that pick. B, two of those teams are very comfortable with the concept of keeping that pick. And C, that Washington is going to cost a lot more than New England. Putting aside the rumors that Washington is pretty high on Jaden Daniels right now, because I don't, whatever. Like, who cares what I think at this moment in time, the Panthers were really high on CJ Stroud, right? Like, whatever, who cares? Putting that all aside, I think that the way that the New England beat has talked about this versus the way the Washington beat has talked about this, when you're going through the pieces that they've written or the tweets that they've tweeted or whatever, it seems very much like New England is much more comfortable, or at least the Patriots beat is much more comfortable entertaining what that would look like. And so I think that New England, obviously I think New England's going to be cheaper than Washington because now, Washington gets, the first bite at the next group of quarterbacks. But like, I think the second reason is I think New England is just much more comfortable building out a team so that when they get a quarterback next year, the year after, that they've got a comfortable base for that quarterback to work off of. I think Washington would like that, but is not as committed to that concept of waiting on a quarterback. And that I think makes sense. I think when you've got like a new ownership structure, but you've got kind of an older coaching and general manager structure, maybe there's a little bit more urgency there. Whereas with New England, it's all new, right? So I think that's that kind of gives us a little bit of, I don't know about insight, but like way to interpret the way that all of this has kind of come out. So yeah, I think that both of those teams are going to be difficult to trade with because they could very easily and conceivably take a quarterback there. I think that Arizona is going to be a relatively cheap trade up. Relatively, I think by all of the trade charts, it still would be a loss because that's what happens with the quarterbacks. But I think that would be a relatively cheaper trade up. But the cost is like you have to be very comfortable that everyone else's fourth quarterback is your second quarterback or something along those lines. So that's kind of the thing there. I think maybe I'm committing the golden mean fallacy here, but I think maybe the sweet spot is probably New England.
Well, with that, we can talk a bit about what's gone on with the team. And actually, before we start talking about kind of strategy, let's talk about tampering. Because Kirk Cousins has, in his introductory press conference, proceeded to say something that was a little surprising. It's not often that you hear the soft part loud in the NFL, and he went out and may have declared a little bit of tampering happened with the Falcons, and what could potentially happen.
Unambiguous.
Well, yes. He's so honest. Like that's you. Gosh darn it. He really he's asked a question, and regardless of what happens in the background, this is what you wanted. This is what you got, Falcons. You got, holy, if we can take a moment before the tampering stuff, they are leaning so hard into that Kirko Chains thing. It is
a little harder than I expected.
Way. It is, I
thought the Vikings PR was overdoing it with Kirko Chains, but this is nuts. For it to being the off season for them to do this is crazy.
I can't wait until week 15 when they're after a losing season, just absolutely hating all things Kirk Cousins. It is going to be remarkable to see the blowback on the Kirko Chains thing. It's so bad. All right, so Kirk may have been involved in some tampering. What do we know?
We know that Kirk said that he had conversations with the Atlanta Falcons head trainer in order to kind of resolve the concerns they have about injury. And the way that he phrased that, I think he said the word yesterday in his press conference. The way that he phrased it would suggest that he did it during the tampering period. So there's a 52-hour, quote unquote, legal tampering period where teams are allowed to contact player representation to feel out the terms and suggest interest. I believe the rules say that they can't discuss numbers, but obviously they do. And that's allowed now, right? Illegal tampering goes on essentially all the time, but since the combine specifically, and specifically at the combine. But the rule of the legal tampering period is that you cannot have a conversation. Teams and people associated with teams and affiliated with teams cannot have a conversation with a player directly, only with that player's representation, unless, of course, that player is representing themselves. And then, of course, they can talk to the player. What's interesting about that is that also means that teams cannot direct their own players to be involved in recruiting efforts. So when Kyle Pitts says he wants Kirk to come to Atlanta, there cannot have been any communication between the team and Kyle Pitts suggesting that they wanted Kirk to come to Atlanta. So that would also be tampering. Now, Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, was pretty explosive about this, mind you, Vikings fan or lapsed Vikings fan. You can never tell with him. That's an important piece of context, but he did call it like the most blatant case of tampering that he had ever seen, which is very funny to me. He'd also mentioned that, like in his show, because this was live, it wasn't in a written article. Quote: "Someone enlisted Cousins to recruit Darnell Mooney from the Bears. So you got tampering within tampering. You got multiple levels of tampering, and Cousins just talked about it openly, like they just didn't care. It was so blatant." I would not be shocked if the Falcons didn't think, hey, here's a veteran. We probably don't have to tell him not to reveal tampering. We've all been here before. And no, that's not how Cousins operates. Aside from being a very earnest person, something that we all know, Cousins has a fumbling problem. He's had a fumbling problem since he's entered the league. Since 2015, he has had the most fumbles of any active quarterback in the NFL. He has continued that proud tradition here. This is the guy that kneeled when he should have spiked the ball at halftime. This is the guy that lined up under the guard, I think, twice, right? Instead of the center?
Yes.
Look, man, he's pretty good at playing quarterback, but he's not great at having all of his I's dotted and his T's crossed. Like, the reason that people think he's good at that is because that's all he focuses on every single waking moment of his life. It doesn't come natural to him. You got to tell him. You got to tell the guy who had an office at Washington, you got to tell him, hey, man, these are the things that constitute tampering, which means that you can't say them. Like, when they ask you, hey, what about your health? Are you on board? Are the Falcons worried that you're not recovering? You say, I'm doing great. And just finish it there. Just stop there. You're not obligated to answer any of the questions. You're just obligated to be there. Just stop there. Not any conversations with the athletic trainer about your injury progress. Not any conversations with Kyle Pitts about whether or not you're going to keep the number if you come over. Not any conversations with Darnell Mooney that if you come over, you should bring him along. Just stop. They had to tell him this. He's very coachable, but you got to coach him first.
Yeah, Kevin O'Connell could have told you that immediately. Hell, Mike Zimmer could have told you that immediately.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Like, look, he's just going to tell the truth, and you're kind of stuck with that. So
yeah, unless you tell him not to, in which case he won't say anything, but he's not going to lie. So I think the most that I can recall off the top of my head for player-specific tampering, well, I guess there's the Dolphins one. Didn't they lose a first? But for player-specific tampering between like teams that raise tampering concerns, it's like they usually negotiate. So usually the team that is quote unquote the victim here, in which case the Vikings, and the team that benefits, in this case the Falcons, would go into like arbitration with the league, and they end up coming up with a solution. Sometimes those solutions are one pick gets transferred to the other team. Sometimes the solutions are a pick swap. Right. Obviously, everyone kind of remembers the Jets-Patriots tampering with Bill Belichick, and that was just like you get a first-round pick now. I I don't know that the Vikings will get the Falcons' 8th overall pick or anything like that. But yeah, probably the Vikings will enter the draft with like a pick that they didn't have. It could even be a 3rd round pick, which would be nuts because they don't have any picks on day 2. So yeah, good job doing a solid for the Vikings on his way out.
Yep.
Kirk Chains.
That's I appreciate this fourth quarter comeback of his. It is nice.
We've been able to experience so many from him in the past 2 years, and only the last 2 years.
It is worth noting that yes, the one you were referring to with the Dolphins was talking about, I believe, Sean Payton, and the Dolphins did in fact lose their 1st-round pick. That was also the one that like there was a weird like swirling around of like Brady and stuff for the Dolphins. That was the Brian Flores situation.
Yeah. So it's all full circle, really.
Yeah, one gigantic, lovely mess. Well, as far as strategy is concerned, this turns more into like talking head thing. So apologies, but do you think it's worth it for the Vikings to attempt to trade up into the 4th, into the top 4 using what they have? A number of people are suggesting a potential JJ trade, but I can't imagine a situation where you can even quantify what Justin Jefferson is even worth. Like it's almost unheard of to be trading a player of that like value.
Yeah, it doesn't happen very often. Obviously, so JJ's in the last year of his deal. We did get a somewhat similar situation with Tyreek Hill and the Dolphins and the Chiefs. And obviously that was worth it for both teams because the Dolphins finally got good at passing the ball and the Chiefs kept winning. Hard to be mad at that, I guess, if you're the Chiefs. But it doesn't otherwise happen a lot. I think receivers, like veteran receivers, can go for a little bit more than people expect. Remember when Brandon Marshall, another Dolphins trade, Brandon Marshall went for like a 3rd or something like that, despite being a veteran who like had off-field issues. But yeah, I mean, Tyreek Hill had 1 year left on his deal. The team that traded for him needed to extend him to a record-breaking contract, and in this case, he went for a 1st-round pick and a 2nd-round pick and 2 4th-round picks that year, as well as a 6th-round pick the next year. That is quite the haul, and is also enough that I think if Vikings fans saw that, some of them would think, okay, I think most Vikings fans would be like, not 2 firsts? Are you kidding me? Not 2 firsts? And also fair enough. But I think that a 1st, a 2nd, and 2 4ths, and a 6th, which is a crazy haul, is getting close to what you could value Justin Jefferson for. I think that probably you'd want a little bit more than that, but I think that that's pretty close to where you're at in terms of what his value would be. And then obviously if the Vikings did that, they would have more than enough to trade up into the top 5 and probably even still retain a 1st and 2nd-round pick along the way. So with all of that, the Vikings would have a quarterback, they'd get a 1st-round pick. Maybe they could select, I don't know, a receiver there. And then a 2nd-round pick, maybe they could pick a corner and maybe the team is slightly worse. I don't know that that's a good move. But yeah, that's probably where you'd value it. And I don't know that I would want to draft a quarterback and then be like, hey man, it's Jordan Addison and a bunch of guys. Good luck.
Not exactly ideal.
Yeah.
But as for the Vikings, it's clear they want to move up. It's clear they want to end up going into the top 4. Is it worth it at this point to try to get it, or is it better to sit and wait and collect picks?
I think it's better to go up and get your guy. I think that, the importance of quarterback is fairly paramount in the league. I think that obviously there is a moment where you can overpay. There is a value at which it's an overpay. But I don't think the Vikings will be forced into that situation, despite kind of how clearly they've signaled that they want to pay to move up, right? So the Vikings will probably pay a little bit more than a lot of teams have paid in a similar situation. And I think the one that comes to mind is the Falcons trading up to 3 for Trey Lance. They didn't pay, relatively speaking, all that much for a quarterback in that case. And I think the Vikings will end up paying more, in part because of their signaling and also in part because I don't think Kwesi is all that great at negotiating trades. So even with that in mind, I think it's probably worth it because you just need a quarterback to compete in the NFL. And I think that what we know of next year's draft class tells us that that quarterback group is not that great. Um, that can always change, right? A guy can pop up out of nowhere like a Joe Burrow or a Josh Allen and move from like the third round to the first round and suddenly be, the top potential player. But for the most part, what we know about that quarterback group suggests to us it's probably a bad move to wait, and this is probably the draft to do it. So I still think it's correct to try and trade up into the top four. You just do have to be mindful that there is a point where you're getting bent over the barrel, and you want to avoid that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some signings because the Vikings obviously signed Sam Darnold, but they also signed Shaq Griffin as well.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of an interesting signing. I wrote a piece over at Zone Coverage about the Shaq Griffin signing and about how it is pretty representative of the way Kwesi Adofo-Mensah does business, which is that there is a really high upside to this player. And when he's at his best, I mean, he's a Pro Bowl quality player. The same was true when they signed Dean Lowry, when they signed Za'Darius Smith, I guess when they signed Harrison Phillips. A lot of their signings were like, hey, man, we know that there is a really high ceiling for this player. And we've seen them hit that ceiling. But there is something holding them back from achieving full market value. Same with Marcus Davenport. It's injury or something else, right? Usually injury, but it could be something else. With Harrison Phillips, there wasn't that. They just paid market price for him. But with all these others, it was like, hey, there's something depressing in the market. And we think that the thing that's depressing in the market is likely mispriced. It's likely incorrect in some way. And they were right on Za'Darius Smith. They were wrong on Marcus Davenport. And we'll see kind of with Shaquill Griffin. But Shaquill Griffin had a really good 2019, which is, I believe, when he actually made the Pro Bowl, and a very, very good 2020. And then his 2021, I believe, was with Jacksonville. 2022 was at Jacksonville. And 2023 was with the Texans and Panthers. And I wouldn't argue that his time in Jacksonville was all that bad. It was very consistent from game to game, more than typical for a cornerback. But he did sign a very big deal, like a $13.3 million deal with Jacksonville. And that is roughly equivalent in 2021 money to the deal that Jalen Johnson just signed in 2024 of $19 million. And I know that seems like that's insane inflation, but that's just what we're dealing with. It's just insane inflation, like all the way down. It was a really big deal. He was one of the top cornerbacks on the market coming off of a Pro Bowl season and a season where he maybe had a really good argument to make the Pro Bowl. The expectation was, of course, that he'd repeat that, and he didn't. The scheme was different, but what's interesting is that he actually was better at the stuff that he wasn't asked to do in Seattle than the stuff that he was asked to do in Seattle when he was playing in Jacksonville, which is that when he was playing press and press zone in particular, he wasn't that great. When he was playing off coverage, he actually played a lot better, which he didn't do very much in Seattle. Kind of weird. Either way, that inconsistency created a lot of problems. And then in the second year of that deal, which is basically a 3-year deal, he suffered a back injury around week 6. So he only played like 5 games. And after he recovered from the injury, they cut him, which is in the offseason, which is just so interesting because he played like okay, inconsistent, but like okay. And they were like $13 million a year. We're just going to eat like the $5 million remaining on it in terms of guaranteed or something like that. And we're just going to let you go. And that to me maybe suggests that there's something besides his level of play that led Jacksonville to let go of him, whether that was the injury and there are concerns about it lingering, or maybe, I don't know, coachability or something. I don't know. That would to me suggest that, because even though $13 million is too much to pay for like an okay cornerback, if you're going to eat $5 million regardless, it's kind of an interesting choice to make. And I think it was motivated by something other than the level of play. But he goes to Texas or Houston to play for the Texans, and it's okay. And he doesn't sign a big deal. It's like $5 million. But he's primarily there because Derek Stingley is hurt again. And so he's playing starting outside cornerback. He doesn't have a ton of nickel slots, slot snaps in the nickel. And that's not where I don't think the Vikings will put him. And he played, in my opinion, like okay. Then Derek Stingley comes back. He's benched. and he gets cut. And the way the Texans characterize it is like, we're doing him a favor. He's good enough to start somewhere, so we're just going to let him go to a team that's going to let him start. And that seems backwards to me. That doesn't make any sense. You have an injury-prone player who's been injured both the years that he's played in the NFL, and his backup, you argue, is a starting quality player who doesn't even cost that much, $5 million. And your move is to cut this guy as a favor to him? That's crazy, especially because it turns out it wasn't a favor. The Panthers picked him up, and they played him for basically one game. He made a couple of spot appearances in other games, but he basically played one game. So that's not what happened, and so it's a very curious situation there. So I don't know what it is, because he's played really well or okay. He has an injury history concern, but when he's played, he's been all right. So I don't know what it is that other teams, because this will be his fourth team or fifth team, right? Seattle. Yeah. This will be his fifth team. So I would argue Seattle didn't say no when he signed with Jacksonville. So I'd say 3 teams said no to him. So that's Jacksonville, Houston, and then the Panthers did not pursue him when he hit free agency this year. So 3 teams said no, possibly 4. I don't know. But there's a lot of unknowns here, which to me is a very Kwesi Adofo-Mensah signing. A lot of upside, not a ton of downside because he didn't cost too much. It's like, quote, up to $6 million. I don't know what the contract is. I haven't looked at more recent reporting on it, but it's probably more than 4, right? So somewhere between 4 and 6 million. Great. Not a huge risk. Pretty good on-field play. Ceiling is Pro Bowl. Very Kwesi signing.
So we also have Jonah Williams as well that was signed.
Yeah, Jonah Williams, the defensive lineman, not the offensive lineman. He's like a 275-pound defensive end type from the Los Angeles Rams. Another in like a series of signings from the Rams that the Vikings have made, although I guess the Texans are a more interesting free agency base for them at the moment. Yeah, he's like a run stuffer at like kind of the 5. So he's a defensive interior guy. His size would suggest that he's a pass rusher, but the last couple of years, he's been a much, much better run stuffer than he has been a pass rusher. In fact, he's a bit of a negative as a pass rusher. So a kind of an interesting guy. Seems like a little bit more than a camp body, but if he got cut, I wouldn't be shocked. The Vikings need bodies at defensive tackle, and this guy is like good at something. So better than most camp bodies.
And also they ended up picking up Ward, Camu Grigor-Hill, and Dan Feeney as well.
Yeah, Dan Feeney is an interesting one. That's like another, I don't know if I'd put him in the same category as Shaquill Griffin because he hasn't actually played like well in the NFL, but he was a really highly touted college prospect that if it weren't for his concussions, many argue would have been a first-round pick. People liked him a lot. He was a very interesting prospect from like Illinois or Indiana or some other Big Ten school in the middle of the Midwest that I don't pay attention to. He was really interesting, but he just hasn't played well, and it's been like 6 years or something like that, and he's been injured in the NFL. And so this to me is a camp body. He hasn't captured what made him such a good prospect, and this is one of those cases where I think with or without that injury, he probably would have turned into a draft bust. And so, which by the way, the concussions injuries. So I don't know how much that plays a role into his evaluation being kind of misidentified or whatever. He's an interesting name. Jihad Ward is a super athlete that hasn't been able to put anything together as a pass rusher or as a run defender. I would argue that Jonah Williams, despite being a little bit less well known, is probably a better player than Jihad Ward because I don't think Ward pushes up against it. And I think they play very similar positions. I don't think he maintains very well against the run, but he is a super athlete. There might be something there, kind of a flyer. Camu Grigor-Hill has like played from scrimmage, but that's like not really what teams sign him for. He's a really good athlete. I think Seattle signed him as an undrafted free agent or drafted him in the 5th round or something like that. And there's like upside, like maybe he's a coverage guy. And I think that the Panthers used him like that as like a coverage guy. And he's much better at coverage than he is at run defense because of his size. But he's got a lot of speed, and that was it. And I primarily evaluated him as a special teamer coming out of the draft, and that's primarily what he's done in the NFL. But he played like 600 snaps last year. I guess I just looked it up, 400 snaps last year. and 400 snaps for the Cardinals before that. But to me, he's like a super sub. He's like a rotational linebacker that if that's where you're going for depth, you're probably okay with that, but that's like not why you're getting him. You're getting him for the special team stuff. And the fact that he's probably better than Troy Dye as a backup is like a nice bonus and is the reason that you'd sign him. But I don't think this is a scenario where the Vikings have like resolved the issues that they have at linebacker, where really all you have is Ivan Pace. And he's really only good at like a couple of things. He's extremely good at those couple of things. Like it's a great trick to have, but you can't be comfortable when that's your whole linebacker core. And I don't think that this is a scenario where the Vikings have meaningfully resolved that. They've resolved some depth concerns if their depth linebackers leaving with a signing like this. I don't think that they've really addressed the starting linebacker issue, which is like not a huge criticism. I just think that that's the context for this particular signing.
Well, let's talk a couple of numbers here because Ben Gessling has been doing a bit of reporting on this. And Shaq Griffin got a 1-year, $4.5 million deal with a with a 2.4 million signing bonus, 1.59 guaranteed. So that helps. Also, while we're talking about, Sam Darnold got a 1-year, $10 million with a 4 void years attached to his contract to spread out his $6.25 million signing bonus. His cap this year is only $5 million.
And his cap next year will be like $4.5 million or something like that. Great.
Pennies on the dollar.
Good for him, man.
Vikings also brought back Harrison Smith, which we should quick mention as well. His deal is covering the final 2 years of his deal, clearing $11.9 million in 2024 cap space, while reducing his cap number by $15.5 million for 2025. His only guarantee is the $7 million signing bonus. He gets $1.49 million in base this year and $1.255 million in base for next. Harrison Smith's coming back.
Yeah. He's coming back, and he freed up cap space to do so, and honestly, he didn't have a choice, which is great. I mean, he could have retired, and he could have been very happy, so he did have a choice. But if he wanted to keep playing, it was going to have to come with a pay cut, which he got some guarantees here, which he wouldn't have gotten if he just did nothing. So there's that. But yeah, I mean, the Vikings, they've got safeties, right? They've got Jay Ward in addition to Josh Metellus and Cam Bynum, and so they could have rolled with 2 safeties next year that they're comfortable starting with Metellus and Bynum. But man, that 3 safety look like worked out really, really well for them. And so having Smith for another year and reducing the cap hit to make sure that happens, that's great. And with the other kind of, I don't know about upgrade with Jerry Tillery, but the other kind of investments that they made the last time we talked, which includes Blake Cashman at linebacker, which is a much more reasonable solution than like Grugier Hill. And Van Ginkel and Grenard, who we talked about last week. It's kind of an interesting front that Smith gets to work with. I'd argue that the loss of Danielle Hunter is like so big that the combination of like Van Ginkel and Grenard and whoever ends up starting at defensive tackle, whether that's Jerry Tillery or Jonah Williams or Jihad Ward or Jonathan Bullard next to Harrison Phillips, those are probably upgrades, but I don't think that, except for Hunter Grenard, but I don't think that upgrade makes up for that difference, in my opinion, in the talent between Hunter and Grenard. So the defensive line is probably the same, but it's more evenly distributed in terms of talent. And that might help somebody like a Harrison Smith. So bringing him back is great. Having a player opposite Byron Murphy and Shaq Griffin is reasonable if he turns out to be pretty good. Again, for like $4.5 million, it's not as if like he's locked into a starting job or anything. But I don't know, kind of an interesting set of moves on defense overall in total that allows you to take advantage of players like Harrison Smith, but also like more evenly distributes the talent. I guess Blake Cashman's probably better than what I would expect Jordan Hicks to play next year. Not better than what Jordan Hicks did last year, but I don't think he can sustain that level of play. So, hey, the Vikings defense turnover, you'd expect a little bit more in terms of improvement. They won't have that capability in the draft if they do successfully trade up for a quarterback, but hey, we get to learn some new names.
So before we go to the mailbag, we wanted to take a moment and talk about your Draft Network article, which if you haven't had a chance to read it, holy crap, please pause this. You will be doing yourself a favor. Pause this and spend the next 20-ish minutes reading an epic tale of ridiculousness. This was so entertaining, and I'm not the only person to say it, there were points during this article that you had mentioned before to me that you were working on this article, and you had kind of glossed over a couple things. There were a lot of things in here that I was just shocked by, and I'd even been told ahead of time that some of this was coming. This was remarkable. This had to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was nuts. I don't know how else to put it. So I don't want to like give away the article right now. It is like my primary mover in terms of like, views and subscriptions and stuff like that. But I'm probably not going to be able to do that because it is a 12,000 word article. So certainly have to read it. If you don't want to pay to read it, I do understand that. I think that it's weird that people were complaining about that. I don't think that there's anything wrong with not wanting to pay to read it. I just think it's weird to complain about it. But there is like a free trial option. Like every Substack, I think, comes enabled with the ability for creators to turn on free trials. And I believe almost every creator turns on free trials because like, duh. So you could have a free trial. Also, here's something that's not that well advertised is that if you're a free subscriber, which is to say you just sign up for the newsletter and the email list, you get like a free article, which I don't think most Substack creators have turned on. It's like a very recent thing that I opted into, but you do get a free article. So this could be that article. I do want you to give me money. I want to make that clear. But like if you've been holding out because of that, there's like two options for you to see the article. But yeah, the way that I like promoted it on Twitter, which I think is like a big part of the reason it got some success, was the tweet is, over the past 3 months, I talked to a dozen current and former employees and vendors, pored over court documents, and combed through archives. I learned about Brazilian tech firms, $1 million in unpaid dues, and something called the Porn House. And I believe those last three words are what drove a ton of clicks.
As it turns out.
Yeah. And it was a crazy thing to end up reporting on. So part of the reason that I flew to the Senior Bowl, so people might remember my piece, What the F Am I Doing at the Senior Bowl? Part of the reason I flew to the Combine, where I wrote a piece about whether or not the NFL Combine was dying, which, by the way, I went to the Combine not knowing what I was going to write, but I also kind of didn't want to do a What the F Am I Doing at the Combine? Or like a bunch of people were like, Arif, are you going to do it? It's like, it's kind of tired, right? Like the Senior Bowl one is like personal, and it's about like my journey as a sports writer in the environment that I'm in and where I'm at. And it would be weird to follow that up with a sequel at the Combine, but I did not know what I was doing at the Combine, and I wanted to get a little bit more done. And I just stumbled upon this article about, potentially the Combine might be dying. And I talked to people and I thought about it, and that's what I wrote out. But part of the reason I went to both of these places is because I was wondering if like maybe I could advance the story that I'm working on with the Draft Network. So the way it starts out is I see that the Draft Network website is just down, right? It's like in the middle of November and it's down. And I see that they're tweeting. And I'm like, what do you tweet? What for who? For what? Like, what are you doing? The website's been down for like 3 weeks. Why are you tweeting in the middle of November about a mock draft that no one can read? That's like really ridiculous to me. And I'm seeing in the replies that like, the one I saw was about like, here where all the offensive tackles in the mock draft are going, right? What do you think? And in the replies, half of them are just like, no way does this tackle fall this far, or, hey, I hope, Chicago doesn't pick this guy or whatever. Right. And the other half were like, where's your website? Your website is dead. I can't read this mock draft because it would be at your website, which is dead. No one can see it. And like, that's so bizarre. So I like respond with like, why are you, paying somebody on your graphics team to produce social media graphics for a website that doesn't exist? I like, it's in the replies. I'm like, what are you doing? Now I don't know whether or not they were paying that person, but at the time I'm like, hey, this is like graphical design work. This is not like simple to keep like a consistent design language across all of your tweets. Okay, crazy. Then in December, there's like this statement that like kind of goes out and around it. I don't know if it was attributable to them, about them being held hostage. And I'm like, that's very weird. And then, I'm like, this is crazy. And then in January, they tweet out like, we're back. We've been held hostage, which that language kind of confirms that statement that was going around. We're back. And I'm like, oh, this is like a weird story, right? Like quote tweet the we're back one with like, I've never heard of like a website being like held hostage by a developer. I'm so confused. And so I tweet that out and someone DMs me and they're like, have you heard about the lawsuit? I'm like, what? What's going on?
Go on.
Yeah, let's get. And they're like, well, it's this lawsuit. They haven't paid their web developer. And I was like, well, that makes sense, but that's still a strange turn of phrase. And so like I pick up the lawsuit and I read through it and I'm like, well, this is like wild. Is anyone talking about this? So I like Google it. Like, no one has written about this. I'm like, okay, I guess this is my story now. Like, what's going on? And so like I message a bunch of people. I'm like, hey, do you know what's going on? And like a bunch of people were like, oh yeah, this like here's this strange thing that you can like kind of dig into. And I'm like going through and like the problem here is that there are a bunch of really weird threads. And obviously the stuff that you see in the story is like crazy, right? But like that's not the stuff that was like really difficult for me to figure out while I'm reporting. Some of the stuff is like in the lawsuit, there's in the complaint section of the lawsuit, which is where they list, which is where ArcTouch, the developer, lists out their grievances. They have like 4 essentially civil violations or civil tort violations against the Draft Network that they list out. They use the wrong dates. There's a typo in the dates. And I was losing my mind because I was like, this timeline doesn't match up. Why would they sign a statement of work? And this doesn't actually end up in the piece because I had to edit the piece down. It's 12,000 words. Imagine if it was 20, right? This is like an irrelevant detail, but it's like an interesting like kind of reporting detail. There's a typo that's consistent throughout the complaint. Why would they sign a statement of work on like June 14th, 2020, and then sign a statement of work on June 20th, 2020? Why would there be 2? And why is the second one twice as much? That doesn't make any sense. Why would they sign one statement of work with one CEO and then a week later sign a different statement of work with a different CEO? Certainly, it seems unlikely because I know they had already changed CEOs. It certainly seems unlikely that it occurred in the interim week and that raised the price by $20,000 a month. So I have to go and dig into the appendices and go and reconstruct the timeline. And the only way it makes sense is if there's a typo in the complaint. It was so infuriating. And I figure it out. And I'm like, oh my God, there's a typo. The statement of work is dated 2019. Okay. And I go back and then I talk to people and they confirm. And I'm like, okay, this is great. This is fantastic. So there's like a bunch of moments like that. But like the thing that gets me the most is, so I finish all of this up. I send it to my editor. I send a couple of emails to the person who ends up being essentially the subject of the piece, Paige Demakos, as well as Don Hudson, the owner of 4th and 1, which is the owner of the Draft Network, or at least has majority shareholding over the Draft Network. I sent out those emails and I sent it to a guy I basically asked to edit the piece because it's like most of the time I don't have an editor for the Substack. I just have to do it myself. But this was like such a big piece and I spent so much time and money getting it together. And it turns out like doing a bunch of jigsaw puzzle work and stuff like that, that like I send that in. The editor is like, this is nuts. This is crazy. What is this? I'm like, hey, I know, but can you just like edit? And he's like, no, I can't. Are you kidding? This is crazy. So like, we're like going through this and he's like, pulling stuff out here and putting stuff in here. And he's like, hey, the timeline here is a little bit confusing. If you could like clean it up with the length, normal editing stuff, right? After he's done and submits it to me, I'm like, okay, well, I still haven't heard back from Paige. So I'm just going to, send a text to a number that I know belongs to her. I'm going to send a couple of DMs like, hey, did you see the email? If you didn't see the email, check your emails or just text me at this number, whatever. We can have a conversation. If you need me to delay the piece so you can answer every question that I have, we can have that conversation, right? Like that's all in the texts and in the emails, right? The night before, I'm like, okay, well, I don't see like on the 19th, right? The piece releases on the 20th. On the 19th, I don't have a response. I'm like, okay, well, I'll just write in this paragraph where I don't get a response. And I'm beginning to have conversations with a lot of the sources that help me kind of build the story. And before I'd submitted to my editor, I had submitted the sections of the story that their information helped produce so I can have them fact check it, right? I'm like, hey, here you say this, or here, I need to know that you were on staff when this happened and that this occurred, right? Here, someone said that you said this, but I didn't hear that from you. Is this true? That kind of stuff, right? And, somebody came back to me and was like, oh my gosh, this like really, this like reading all of this kind of together, all of these like little paragraphs together, takes me back. I mean, I can't even believe that there was cocaine at the house. And I was like, what? Excuse me? And it's like, that's not in the piece. He's just like, God, it takes me back. God, remember when there was cocaine at the house? I'm like, what are you talking about? I've never heard of this. It's the night before publish. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. So I'm like, okay, I got to text everybody, right? Because I can't just like put it in because the one guy was like, nah, remember the cocaine? So I'm like, okay. So I'm like texting. I'm like, geez, was there a story about cocaine you forgot to tell me? Like a great text to send to somebody at like midnight, right?
If you weren't on a government list, you are now, sort of thing. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And they're like, oh, yeah. I'm like, what do you mean, oh, yeah? That is extremely memorable. We had an hour-long conversation, and you didn't bring this up at all. And they're like, well, yeah, the porn house was kind of like overwhelming, right? And I was like, I get it. But this is a reason that it's overwhelming, right? Like, you understand that is I would have led with that, actually. And they're like, yeah. And I was like, well, okay. Well, I got a couple of details about how it was discovered and what it was and whatever. I'm not going to tell you the detail. Tell me what your experience with the cocaine was. And they were like, oh, okay, well, we found it in bags inside the patio. And I was like, okay, that matches the other story. Great. I've got like 3 people telling me this cocaine story is real. I can put it in the piece. And then I was like, hey, none of you took any pictures of the cocaine, did you? And they're like, are you kidding me? And I'm like, yeah, I understand. I get it, but I had to ask. Okay, great. And then somebody was like, yeah, man, did so-and-so tell you the story about the office chairs? And I was like, you can't be telling me. I had 3 conversations with you. 3. You can't be telling me this now. It's go time in 4 hours. Like,
my
you can't be doing
favorite
this.
part of the piece is about the office chairs. I
Right?
cannot. Every time, I cannot even.
And it wasn't in the original version of the piece at all. It's 4 hours before go time. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. And he's like, oh, yeah, so-and-so didn't tell you about the office chairs. Well, this is like this is what happened. And I was like, what? Well, okay, it's like kind of interesting that like the office chairs didn't arrive and you had to put it together. And like, maybe I'll put that in the piece, right? I don't know. And so I like text so-and-so, right? I'm like, hey, office chairs? What's going on here with the office chairs? And he's like, oh, yeah, that was crazy because we had to take apart a stripper pole. And I was like, what? What?
So basically, you're saying that while you were putting this story together, it was the equivalent of Luke Braun listening to one of my stories and being like, no, wait, stop. Yeah. I need to write this down. What are you talking about?
I was like, this is, I can't, I'm like, okay, well, that's, okay, we've confirmed the office chair thing, and I don't even know if I needed to do that, because I don't even know if that's going to be in the story, but now that there's a stripper pole involved, which nobody mentioned in the whole, I had 8 conversations about the porn house. No one mentions the stripper pole at all. 6 people mentioned the porn wall. Totally understandable, very visible. I get it. That was a stress point. Okay, fine. No one mentions the stripper pole, like at all.
It's a load-bearing porn wall.
Yeah, right. You can't take it down otherwise. But yeah, I'm like, okay, great, okay, cool. So now I got to ask about, and so like I'm going back and forth, and they're like, oh yeah, but actually we did use the lights, and I was like, oh Jesus Christ. So they give me a picture of the lights being used. And I'm like, well, okay, I can't use this picture because it'll de-anonymize you, but this is a great photo. I'm glad you have it. So I have to like go to the live stream again and pick out so these are like last minute details that were like a big part of the story, like really taking off, like really, really taking off. and these occur in like the 11th hour, right? Like I've been working on this for like 3 months, and it's like, okay, well, here's a bunch of new, and it's like I got a bunch of details, and some of them I couldn't confirm, right? So there's like other stuff that like didn't make it into the piece that I'm just like, okay, well, if you could have told me this like a month ago when I talked to you, or 2 months ago when I first talked to you, that would have been really phenomenal stuff. There's like, how in the piece was like these pull quotes about the way people are talking about, the CEO. Some of them I had to pull out because they were like, oh, I used that exact phrase with her, so she would know that that was me. I'm like, that's so funny. I can't use it. These are crazy explosive quotes to be using about a person who still has that job, right? And would not like, I name this person as being bad at their job is like a crazy thing to like have a quote about, right? So I had to like take some of these explosive quotes out. So it was like a weird story that I had to like run down. And some of these people I'm talking to in person at the Combine, some of these people at the Combine are giving me tips. So I talked to somebody at the Combine that was never employed by the Draft Network that was like, hey, I've been talking to these guys for like a while, and like these are the things that I've heard that maybe it'll help you run down some stuff. I'm like, oh, okay, great. Which is how I got in contact with one of the vendors that helped confirm some details and had mentioned that they had missed out on payments. There was a freelancer that was missing out on tens of thousands of dollars that talked to me at the Combine. It was like great to have like all of this, like, oh, this travel is like worth it because it's getting me, more confirmation of this, and it's kind of building up this background of, all of that. Great, fine. But like so the bones of the piece are built over these like 2-3 months of like on the ground journalism, I guess. Like it's very weird because I don't like do this, but like, it's like, oh, I'm like building a case and I'm building a timeline, and I've got this timeline going in a document that I can turn into the piece or whatever. And then all of these details just come out in the last, like, and offhand, they weren't like, oh, you should include this. It was like, man, that takes me back. Like, I
love the retweets from the people who were at the house who were like, I didn't even know about the sex toys.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, Malik Willis's quarterback, private quarterback coach Quincy Avery was like, wow, I was there. I didn't know about that at all. Right. And it's like, yeah, man, if you went left instead of right or something, you would have opened up a closet and there would have been the sex toys and maybe cocaine. I don't know where they put it.
Just a surprising amount everywhere.
Yeah. Just nuts, which like, there's like the porn house only constitutes genuinely a very small portion of the story. There's so much in the story that like the whole idea was that there'd be, this history of the website and what it means for like Draft Twitter and stuff like that. And there's like a lot of characterizations of Draft Twitter I left out because, it wasn't one monolithic thing. There's a lot of people that didn't like the Draft Network guys that were in Draft Twitter. There's a lot of people that loved what Draft Twitter was doing. The people that didn't like what Draft Twitter was doing, people that loved what Draft Twitter was doing, but also like TDN, all I didn't want to spend too much time there, but there's like a building kind of, this is why this website is important. And here are kind of these early stumbling blocks. And here's kind of the early warning signs. I'm trying to build in, hey, we saw some signs about how this would go kind of early on. The stuff in the porn house is salacious, right? It's like eye popping, right? It's crazy. It's also like not the wrong that the CEO committed necessarily. Like it was irresponsible to book that house, obviously, right? But like the 3 or 4 additional details don't really like reinforce that any more than the initial detail, right? But it is like a crazy thing that kind of represents how fly by night the whole operation turned out to be at that point, which was in 2022, I think. Yeah, 2022. And how it would continue to kind of go off the rails. But there's, suggestions, and I don't ever accuse the CEO of embezzlement because I can't know kind of where the money goes and where it comes from or whatever. But there's the suggestion that potentially embezzlement is involved, right? 'Cause I don't know, but it seems as if, right, with like international vacations and missing paychecks and things that to me, by my eye, look like they probably violate labor law if they're true. I want to be pretty careful with my language here. Um, Things about like reimbursement and people whose livelihoods are really impacted by this, people who are impacted by what the Draft Network was, who never worked there, that saw it as like a, this is my goal, this is where I want to work, or this is kind of help build what draft coverage is supposed to look like for me. There's a lot of that, and I wanted to get all of that across, and how what has happened to the website, which is still up, you can still go there, has been like a betrayal. What's interesting is that one of the issues that I had at the website, so at the very bottom, I'm like, well, this is what the state of the website is now. I signed up with a premium subscription so I could test out all the features, right? And I went to the website using the premium sign-in option, and I signed in on 2 separate browsers, on my laptop as well as on my phone, to see if the issues I was having were localized to either my experience or my IP or whatever, or I've got a bunch of extensions on Chrome. Maybe they're screwing around with some stuff, right? And so I go in 2 different browsers on my desktop, I go on my phone, and I'm experiencing the same problems, right? That so at the bottom of the piece, I mentioned that on the website, as a premium member who gets access to, there's like 5 or 6 features listed. One of those features is an ad-free experience. Another one of those features is a comment section. And the comment section is broken for me. Anytime I try to use the comment section and I don't leave a comment, if I try to X out or press cancel, nothing happens. That occurred on all 3 web browsing platforms that I used, right? The same thing occurs with the ad-free experience. Now, I don't get treated to banner ads as a premium subscriber, right? But I do get treated to the autoplay videos, and the autoplay videos are full of ads. And I got that on all 3 platforms. Well, when I go to the website today, that's no longer true for my premium account. So they fixed that, which to me suggests that it was always very easily fixable. So I don't know why they didn't ever do that, or why they never test the website as if they were a premium subscriber. That's crazy. I can go to my own Substack and see what it looks like as a free user, or as a monthly user, or as a yearly user, or as a founding user, right? Like I've got all of those options. Now, mind you, Substack does all the back end for me, but like that is like a very basic feature that you'd expect to have. So I am surprised that it was that easy to fix. It turns out they do have a Discord still. It's still somewhat active. I still don't know how to get into it. I think you have to email them, which seems like a very poor way to use one of the 6 features. There's no instructions. Maybe now there is. Maybe they fixed that, but I don't know. But yeah, so like updates, there you go. But yeah, the piece did really well, obviously, because I'm talking about it. But it's been huge. This has been like a really good month for me, which I think for a lot of people who've been listening to this podcast for a little bit know how difficult the past year and a half, 2 years have been for me. Really good month for me. The Aaron Rodgers piece did really well, which is about conspiracy theories. The Kirk Cousins, I don't know about farewell, but Kirk Cousins finality type piece did really well for me. That was this month. And this piece did really well for me. So I'm kind of more back on my feet in a way that I haven't been since I started the Substack. So that's really great, and I'm really happy that the piece did well. And I mentioned on Twitter, like, hey, I'm really lucky that all 3 of these pieces were really well received. And a bunch of people were like, that's not luck, that's skill. And like, yes and no. Like, I agree that I wrote those pretty well. Like, I did some of my best writing. Like, I don't consider myself a very good like writer of prose. And I'm really proud of the writing that went into it and the way to structure those pieces. So I'm really happy about that. But that's not what I mean. It's really good pieces get ignored all the time. Really great pieces. AJ Perez over at Front Office Sports has been doing an incredible job covering what is happening with Sports Illustrated and what was previously known as Maven, but is now Arena Group, and the owners of Sports Illustrated, but they don't run it, like Authentic Brand. An incredible job. There's like 5 or 6 pieces on it. And maybe one of them has like really gone viral. I mean, his Pro Football Focus piece kind of did. But it's like, none of those pieces seems to have hit kind of the same single day impact as mine, and I don't, that's not like fair to him because he's done AJ Perez has done an excellent job with all of those, and so yeah, it helps that the piece is some of the best work that I've produced, but I did also get lucky that got featured in ways that I didn't anticipate. So I'm really happy about that. I was so nervous because I put so much time and money and effort, and there were times when I'm like, I don't know if this piece is worth writing, and do people care about what happened to the Draft Network? I don't know. And at some points I was like writing because I was like, okay, I did all these interviews. The people I talk to feel that it's important that I tell their stories and how they got hurt by this whole process. So I'm going to do it because I have an obligation to them, and I feel like I should fulfill that obligation. And it was less about this piece is going to be, big for me, or that this piece is going to do really well, and more about like, hey, I've done so much groundwork here that I don't really think anyone else is going to do. And so it falls upon me ethically to do it. And so the fact that it did really well is really phenomenal. So I'm really happy about that. But yeah, go read it. It's the pinned piece on wideleft.football, the rise and fall of the Draft Network. And it exposed my writing to a bunch of new audiences, a lot of whom seemed to really like it. I did get one message on Substack. I turned on Substack DMs, and I've only ever received one, and it was on Thursday, the day after the piece was published, and it was just, how do I unsubscribe? Which interesting only DM to ever get on Substack. Well, now that I've said it, but I was like, yeah, man, it should be pretty intuitive, but if you're on mobile, here's a screenshot of how to do that. If you're on desktop, here's a screenshot of how to do that. It's not really my department. I just write. The Substack does the Substack stuff.
Is it better to get that or the guy who was in the original Twitter reply going, anybody got the free link to this?
Okay, I responded with, it's bold to do that in the replies, but I did think it was like funny and cheeky. Like, I'm not mad at that guy, really. I was just like, that's interesting. And then someone responded with, but out of this doesn't concern you, which I thought was hilarious. And I was like, all right, that's funny. All right, I'll leave it alone. But there was another guy that was like, I cannot believe that you would sully, Krabs and Marino and Solak and the other one, Trevor Sigma, the other one. I can't believe you'd sully them. They do such good work, and to put all of that behind a paywall is evil. And it's like, I did this like kind of for them. What are you talking about, man? And I should put it behind the paywall. It's crazy that I would put that story out for free. I've put out a couple of like fairly deep divey-ish, so obviously not that deep divey-ish stories for free, like the Super Bowl piece, right? Where I'm talking about the shooting at the parade, and I talk about like the history of school mass shootings in the United States and the Second Amendment, because I felt weird putting that one behind a paywall, but also you should put some stuff out there for free so that people kind of get an understanding of what you're doing. But like that piece 100% goes behind a paywall. It's crazy to me. So the guy that got mad that it was behind a paywall, I was like way more upset with than the guy who was like, hey, does anybody have a way around this paywall? Like, okay, that's weird to put in the replies, but I guess you don't know where else to ask. Yeah. So that makes sense. And then the guy who was like, hey, this doesn't concern you, was extremely funny. So I let it go. But the guy that was mad at me, and then like he just kept going. He's still like, he said something earlier today in the thread. It's almost been a whole week. Like, chill. And then he also got mad that I retweeted the Kim Mulkey stuff. The Kim Mulkey, LSU women's basketball head coach.
He might just be mad in general.
Yeah, but he was like, why is everyone judging her before the article comes out? And it's like, I don't think you know how this goes. First, I'm judging her for calling something a hit piece when she has no idea what it is. Second, I'm judging her for threatening to sue a newspaper before a piece comes out. Third, I'm judging her for calling the Brian Kelly piece a hit piece, because I read it. It's not. I wouldn't argue it's sympathetic to Brian Kelly, but it certainly doesn't really criticize him more than it criticizes the state of Louisiana, which fair. I don't know that the state of Louisiana, in terms of its governance structure, has like a ton of fans out there. I don't know if anyone's caping for them, but it weird. I'm criticizing for all of that. And then I'm also suggesting that probably she has a bunch of stuff to hide if this is how she's reacting. Right. So, and he's like, people are judging her before the article comes out. He's like, no, we're judging her for what she said about an article. If someone was like, hey, a Kim Mulkey story is coming out of the Washington Post on Thursday, I would have been like, whoa, that's going to be interesting. I'm going to read it. And not, wow, I bet she gets blown up. But now I'm like, I bet she gets blown up. Because of what she said.
Couldn't have made it bigger if she tried.
Yeah. I hope that a couple of years from now, we learn that there was a collaboration, a collusion even, between her and the Washington Post. Because this is exactly how you do a wrestling promo, right?
Yeah.
It was pitch perfect.
Do not read, I think she even said, do not read this article. Like, well, now that's the only thing I want to do.
Wonderful.
Well, let's go to the mailbag. Let's finish up here. We got Sick Rosa, who asks, odds Brett Coleman is onto something with his theory that teams are lining up to take the Vikings package.
So Brett Coleman tweeted, I feel like picks 2, 3, 4, and 5, which I don't know that the Chargers are really going to trade that pick to the Vikings, because the Chargers are probably going to trade that pick. I just don't know about to the Vikings. Lining up for the chance to get Minnesota's picks should be some kind of warning sign to all of us. I don't know what that warning is yet, but it's there. I don't know what he means by that. I don't know what he means. But I do think it means that he thinks that the Vikings are 100% going to trade their 2 picks and that these teams are receptive to it. And like, okay, fine. But I agree with that. I don't know that Brett is suggesting that he has more inside information than anyone else on this particular specific topic. I know that Brett gets a lot of good information from teams, but I also know that he doesn't really think of himself as somebody who reports on news and stuff like that. And so I don't think he's breaking anything, nor do I think he thinks he's breaking anything by saying this. I think he's just trying to read the tea leaves the same as any of us. So I don't know that he's any more onto something than anybody else. I think that he's right, but it's because I happen to agree with this interpretation of what these teams in the NFL have been doing over the past couple of weeks, and not because I think that he stumbled upon some new piece of information.
Well, let's discuss some of the new news today about the hip drop tackle that was banned. Yeah. Deez asks, can both of you give a letter grade to the current NFL on-the-field product in your eyes? Considering how much defense has been dissolved with rule changes and officiating being a consistent problem, I'm of the opinion that football just isn't a fun product to watch anymore. Kind of while discussing this, we can also mention that the hip drop tackle was banned today, and players are genuinely concerned, and apparently the NFLPA doesn't really have much power anymore.
Yeah, it was so interesting that the NFLPA was roundly opposed to it. The only player I've seen in favor of it, running back. Oh my gosh, I already forgot his name. There's an A in it. Great, good job, Arif. He's been injured twice, he says, on this. Former Cardinals running back. It's coming into my brain. I think he played for Alabama. Kenyon Drake. So there is an A in it, but not where I would have expected. Kenyon Drake was the one who was like, I'm glad this is gone. And every other player, offense and defense, has been like, this is crazy. What are defenders supposed to do? Kyle Rudolph was like, I don't know what defenders are supposed to do. I think this is bad. And it's like, Kyle Rudolph, right? He's like, I benefit from, as being a tight end, running over smaller defensive backs. And this is just bad. Obviously Harrison Smith is against it. I think Grenard, I didn't know whether or not that was actually his account, but Grenard seemingly, it probably is against it. A bunch of players. And I know the other offensive players were like, that's wild. That's nuts that you did that. In the NFLPA, it was just absolutely not, right? Very curious about this. Now, the nature of the CBA is such that the NFLPA does not get prior authorization over competition committee changes. So, that it's not as if that was they circumvented the CBA or anything like that. But it does maybe suggest that, if the NFLPA cannot negotiate themselves onto the competition committee, that they're not a super powerful union. And it's not even in their top 5 priorities, which is critical. They're just not getting what they want. They're not. I don't even want to argue that they're bad at their job. In fact, I think that under I think he just stopped being president, J.C. Tretter. But I think under J.C. Tretter, they've actually done a pretty good job for the most part. But there's only so much you could do, and it's more about power dynamics than it is about the individuals negotiating for or against their behalf, right? But yeah, so for people unfamiliar with the hip drop tackle, the idea is that if you grab a player and in the process of grabbing a ball carrier, you leave the ground, which doesn't mean lifting off of the ground, but like you're leaving the ground so that you can drop your hips, right? So you're lowering your center of mass suddenly by leaving the ground. You grab a player, and then in the process of grabbing the player and in the process of dropping your hips and leaving and having your feet leave the ground, you also rotate in some manner. And then also, and this is a pretty important detail, land on a player's body part. That constitutes a substantial increase in injury risk, and that additional injury risk is so substantial that it is worth legislating out. And the thing that's really interesting to me is that this language was not used in NFL circles until like last year, the hip drop tackle language. Now, it has been used in rugby for slightly longer than that, so it doesn't emerge out of the ether, but it is kind of newish. In rugby, they talk about, so in the NFL, they're using swivel and non-swivel. In rugby, they use the word rotate, which I think is a lot better because swivel seems like kind of what counts as swiveling. But like rotating is like you're rotating against the vector of attack, right? But like grip, rotate, and fall, or whatever they call it. And the rugby video on it, on when they ban it, is like really good on explaining what is a legal tackle that looks like a hip drop tackle and what is an illegal tackle that looks like a hip drop tackle. And from my understanding, and they only banned it like last year, but from my understanding, this ban has been effective and has not, again, from my understanding, substantially impacted rugby all that much in terms of the effectiveness of defenders in stopping ball carriers. But I do have a lot of problems. One is that the language is a little bit different in a pretty substantial way. And the one that stands out to me is that it does not seem clear to me that the center of, or not the center of mass, the majority of your body weight is being accounted for in the NFL version as it is in the rugby version. So there are a couple of examples in the rugby video that's been going around of a legal hip drop tackle that contains a grip, that contains a rotation, and that contains a fall to the ground where you land on somebody's body part that is still legal because the majority of your body weight is not on that player's body part, right? It's usually a leg or an ankle or a foot or something like that. And so those are still legal. And I think that's really good that there's legal versions of the hip drop that they included in their video because it helps clarify things. But the video that I wouldn't argue that the NFL put it out, but they allowed multiple beat reporters to put out a video recorded on their phone. It's just really poorly done. Just put out the video of the NFL. But a bunch of beat writers recorded on their phones. And, you know, it is not a requirement in my brain that they should have the best phones available to them. And seemingly not to their brains either. Not their fault. I blame the NFL. But a not great quality set of videos came out where there's 4 tackles. And I guess all of them are illegal. And all of them look different. And some of them look like they should be legal based off of the explanation of the rules that we were given. The clarification that came out from Rich McKay, who's on the competition committee, suggested that this occurs maybe once per game, the illegal version of the tackle. And so it shouldn't have that big of an effect. And the thing that is the illegal version is the part that includes the swivel. And when I look at these videos and I see kind of which ones are counted as illegal, like the Seattle Seahawks tackle of the New York Giants does not, to me, include what I would argue is a swivel or a rotation or anything, right? And if you take a look at the rugby video, a lot of those are also horse collar tackles, which are not illegal in rugby. And so they're adding a rotation and body weight component to a horse collar tackle, which to me is like, oh, yeah, that guy absolutely got effed up. That makes sense. These don't have that. These are like, I'm attacking you at your shoulders or your arms. And then also, so it doesn't seem clear to me because two of these, like one of them, like the Chiefs Bengals one, where the Chiefs player tackles the Bengals. I think it's a tight end. I think it's like 20 on the Chiefs, which is like one of their excellent defensive backs. Justin Reed, maybe? I don't know. Tackling the Bengals tight end. And like the guy doesn't swivel until after both of them have hit the ground. And so the swivel does not constitute any part of the motion, at least in my brain, given the word swivel, that would contribute to injury risk. And in fact, his body weight hits the turf much more than it hits the back of this guy's legs. And he swivels mostly as a means of getting up off the ground, right? And so this is very confusing to me. And there's not a lot of clarity, and the NFL is getting criticized for this, and I think rightfully so. But there are apparently legal versions of this. But the thing is, so they say that the injury risk is 20 times higher based off their data, but that it only occurs once per game, and that it results in maybe 2 or so injuries a year. And like the NFL constantly is negotiating between what level of injury risk is necessary and what level of like quality play is necessary to preserve. And one of the elements of that negotiation is that they have to admit that injury is inevitable in a contact sport, right? And like I think that they have just made an insane move to reduce 2 or 3 injuries a year and eliminate a critical component to the way that people tackle, especially ball carriers that are running away from them, whether it's from the side or from behind. And when you take a look at the illegal rugby tackles that are being outlawed, almost all of them involve multiple tacklers being there, and that the illegal tackler is just one of a few. And I just think that the nature of rugby, where you don't have like a line of scrimmage, it's mostly continuous play. Obviously, I know there's like scrums and stuff, right? But you don't really have like a line of scrimmage and a set play and a snap and all that. And you don't like have guys getting past the defense on a thrown pass, right? Like I think the nature of that is that those tackles you can effectively get rid of while still having other types of rugby tackles that will get what you want done. But I don't think that there's a lot of options for defenders in football that accomplish the same role in the situations where that particular tackle ends up getting employed. And on top of that, that tackle is a product of like inertia, right? This is my issue with the body weight rule, right? Is that, yeah, you can ask defenders to make Herculean efforts to counteract their own body's inertia in order to prevent committing a penalty. We've seen Danielle Hunter do it. We've seen Chris Jones do it. Mostly we remember when players do it and then they get penalized for not doing it anyway, which is another thing. But like both of those players successfully avoided putting their body weight in sacks, and then they get penalized for it anyway because it's a very difficult rule to adjudicate. So we've seen players do it. It is possible, but it makes for a much worse product. And also, not all these players can do it. There's a bunch of really talented edge rushers who can get to the quarterback that cannot do that. And so instead, they pull up, and then there's a big play. And now people are kind of mad at the guy, but they also kind of sympathize with the guy because they're like, okay, yeah, I kind of get why you didn't do that. But also, I really wish you did that. Like it sucks that we're like, I never want to see an edge rusher tearing off the edge and getting a free shot at a quarterback and just like pulling up. I hate that. That sucks. And sometimes it's necessary because the quarterback got rid of the ball and the edge rusher has like 3 steps, and it's like, okay, well, all right, don't do that. But they're doing it with like 1 step because they don't know what's available to them. And guess what? Some of them gator roll, some of them swivel, some of them hip drop because they can't do the other stuff, right? And so now that's getting taken away from them. It's crazy to me. So yeah, it seems to have worked in rugby. It seems like the way the rule is being discussed is different between the two sports in ways that I think are really meaningful and impactful. And I think that even so, they are different enough sports in terms of what's getting accomplished when you bring down a ball carrier and how that plays out. That actually we can't just apply one to the other. It's actually a reason why the hawk tackle hasn't really caught on. Remember when Seattle got like really, I don't know about famous, but like the use of the hawk tackle became really popular, and they were trying to teach it in USA football at all levels because it's a safer tackle that actually it doesn't look like a hip drop, but if it's like somewhat poorly executed, does turn into a hip drop. So that's another thing. But it was touted as a safer tackle because it doesn't put a player's head at risk, right? It's a different tackling technique that involves, a lot of times a lot of torsion and rotation and stuff like that. Well, one reason it hasn't become super popular in the way that we thought it would back in like 2014 is because it comes from rugby, and you have to give up a yard or two when you do it. And in rugby, that's not that significant. It's just because of the way there's no like down system, right? So it's not that significant. But 2 yards are really significant in the NFL. So a lot of teams didn't adopt it because of that. And I think this is kind of the same thing. But now you're legislating it as opposed to promoting it as a good practice. So to me, the NFL on-field product, based off of like the history of NFL games that I've watched, which admittedly compared to most people, not very long, is like a B. I think like the fact that we've got these great quarterbacks is really fantastic. I think the fact that you can't hit them kind of sucks. And I think the fact that we are getting more towards a uniform version of football where defense just matters less sucks. But overall, it's a B. It's a good product, right? I think this hurts that. I don't know about how substantially, but every single kind of chiseling away to create a more uniform NFL product that doesn't allow a diversity of strategies, both in terms of the way teams build their teams and also the way teams build their rosters or build their schemes and then build their rosters, it really sucks. I would love to have a variety of successful offensive and defensive schemes and a variety of offensive and defensive roster building strategies. And it feels like we're moving further away from that because of rules like these.
Well, Simon asks, what is the maximum draft capital, including future picks, would you give for the top couple of quarterbacks?
For Caleb Wilson, I'd give up basically everything that you can give up. You can't give up drafts like 4 years out, so it's the next 3 set of picks. I would do that for Caleb Williams. I think he's very good. I don't think he's as good as Trevor Lawrence. I think he's extremely good. For Drake May, a fraction of that. If you could get up to 2 and get Drake May, and Washington's okay with that, I'm okay giving up the 2 first-round picks from this year and the first-round pick from next year and the second-round pick from next year, but probably not the first-round pick after that. And then after that, I would significantly cut the price for a Jaden Daniels, and then I'd cut the price a little bit more for J.J. McCarthy. I would not give up more than what the Vikings have in this year's draft in terms of like day one. Like I would give up the 2 1s and like maybe a second next year, right? To move up for JJ McCarthy if the Vikings had determined that this is a guy that really fits their system really well. And I wouldn't give up anything for Nix or Penix. I'm not even comfortable drafting them at 23. So I'd trade down and get them.
Zach Dixon asks, assuming they draft JJ McCarthy or Jaden Daniels, who can the Vikings draft to replace KJ Osborne to fill out their J's only starting roster of CJ, JJ, TJ, AJ, and JA?
Yeah, so it really depends on how these players decide to construct their names. So Marvin Harrison Jr. and Brian Thomas Jr. don't go by MJ or BJ, right? I think Vikings fans would force the issue in that scenario, and I commend them for it. Great. Normally I'm like a respect people's names kind of thing, but this is for a bit. So, think about it. But otherwise you have to kind of go with, okay, you've got J.A. Jordan Addison. You didn't have to. So you can just pick guys with J names. So the guy from Washington, Jalen McMillan, is supposed to be a fairly well-regarded receiver. My understanding is that he's a round 2 guy, but maybe you could get him in the 4th. I don't know. Things are weird. Jacob Cowing just had a very good pro day. I don't think that was actually Malachi Corley. I get the 2 confused. Jake McCowing had a pretty good combine, if I remember correctly. He had a very good Senior Bowl. I know that. He's somebody that you could get. I think along the lines of Jalen McMillan, who I think just from a name perspective just fits that really well, is Jalen Polk, who also, from Washington. So that'd be kind of fun. Those are all pretty great names. There's Jamari Thrash, which is just a good name. It's just a great name. His name is Thrash. That rules. He's an after catch guy, kind of slot ish. You can play him on the outside, but he's an after catch and deep guy, kind of like Albert Wilson, but before he came to the Vikings, like when he was healthy with the Dolphins. And that's a really good name, but I think you keep on wanting to say Thrash. So I don't know that you could really truly make him part of the J offense. And then a guy that just has a name for the Johnny Wilson, who you could theoretically also play a tight end. There's kind of a debate about whether or not he's a receiver or a tight end, but Johnny Wilson is like, that's a good football name.
We have Johnny Wilson and Johnny Munt. That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
No accent, no accent required.
Yeah, exactly. There's a couple of other J's in the draft. There's Dylan Johnson, you could call DJ. He's a running back. Jalen Wright, who's a very fast running back, is another J. And then there's like some tight ends, and the most of that variety tight end is AJ Barner from Michigan, who you definitely be able to get on day 3, unless his stock is way higher than I anticipate. I do kind of like him too, so there's that.
Well, next question I have for you is from Osman, who asks, it seems the Vikings plan will require them to be smarter and or to get more luck than their division opponents. If that's the case, is it actually a good plan?
I just feel like everybody's plan is to be smarter and to get more luck. It's just really engineering your spot where luck matters more or less, right? Like the first couple of drafts the Vikings had, the way that they tried to get more lucky than their division opponents is to maximize their bites at the apple by trading down, even if it was a quote unquote loss, and increasing the odds that, they were the house as opposed to the customer, right, at the casino. But even the house on an individual bet has to get lucky, right? It's just you're shifting the odds so that just happens a little bit more often for you. The Vikings tried to do that with every pick. This year, they're instead of maximizing the number of times they get lucky, it very much seems like they are maximizing the output of what happens if they get lucky, which is important because at some point you do need to have an impact player, right? And in this case, it'd be at quarterback. So, they do have to be smarter or luckier than their opponents, but that's always true. What's different here is that it is localized into like one player, probably. Right, if they are likely to trade up into the draft and grab a quarterback, it's going to be that. But yeah, I think it's a good plan because I think that if you can't drafting a good quarterback is like almost always luck, almost always. And so you're just going to have to hit. And yeah, that's a good plan. But you gotta put yourself into a spot where a bad pick is going to hurt you a lot before a good pick can help you a lot.
A Hyundai for one of us asks, Arif spoke today about manufacturing picks. Do you think there would be a benefit to trading early to pick 4 or 5, giving them striking distance to 2-3 should the right trade or quarterback become available? Seems to bleed value, but it could give the trade partner top talent still.
It probably bleeds value. I think that that's kind of an interesting way of looking at it. So this comes from the Minnesota Football Party, which I recorded earlier today on Monday, where I talked about how it's kind of silly that the Vikings needed to trade up to 23 for any of this to work out. I did explain like the way it works out, but at the end of the day, like the second and the sixth and the whatever, right? All of that is like, that's worth the thing that they traded for. Like they just manufactured a first round pick in a way that they didn't really quote unquote need to, because all of that value they had already had. And so they manufactured that pick. And so this question is asking, if they traded up with, like, let's say the Chargers to 5, therefore manufacturing the 5th pick based off of that value, would that be worth it? Because the 5th overall pick is perceptually worth a lot more. And I think probably not, because I think the value of the 2 first-round picks is much more interesting to teams than the value of just the 5th pick. And I think that you probably have to give up both first to get up to 5. And so probably not. But if say Washington was like, we're not willing to trade down all the way to 11, even with another first round pick, but we are willing to trade down to number 5 because we think that at 4, it's not going to be a quarterback. We think that the Cardinals are not going to be able to get what they want. So we'll get a quarterback at 5. Then you're like, oh, okay, well, we'll just trade up to, in that scenario where Washington basically tells them we'll trade down to 5, that would make sense, right? Or even 4, right? But I think that for the most part, in most situations, That doesn't work here. I think just the strategic value of having the ability to say 2 first-round picks this year is really substantial in a way that only trading down 3 or 4 spots in the draft, which means that the cost of giving up that pick isn't too high, so the price would be lower, isn't worth it, especially because every successive step you do to manufacture that pick, to have the essentially the verbal guarantee that you've got a good scenario for you, i.e. the multiple first-round picks, you're bleeding more additional value. So every move that you make, you're probably losing value on the move as you trade up. And so you probably should not be doing that too many times. So I don't think that's a good strategy unless you've got an assurance from one of those 2 teams, essentially, that that's going to be a necessity.
Luke Braun asks, now that you're a capital J journalist, what political issue will drive your heel turn to lib-coded centralism?
Universal healthcare for everybody but Luke Braun. Whatever the opposite of that is, he has now. He has to pay the taxes for everybody on that. No, I now that I own a business, I filed my taxes like 2 weeks ago, and it just kicked me in the teeth. That's probably the thing that would turn me. Yeah. It's going to be the small business owner thing.
Not Your Father's Dopamine asks, does it feel like the media narratives during the pre-draft process have gotten out of hand? When I really started to pay attention to football in 2007-ish, a rumor seemed to mean more, especially the info coming in from the combine and things like that. Nowadays, draft narratives seem to change every waking minute. I feel like every single blip on ESPN, NFL Network, Fox Sports, etc. is made for clicks first and content later. Am I just getting old and cranky, or does the media suck worse than ever before?
The back in my day, the rumors were better is great. That's so good. I love that. No, you just heard fewer of them, I think, is what happened, because in 2007, your primary source of rumors is like watching ESPN, maybe logging onto a website. Like, I'm not saying that people didn't like log onto the web in 2007. What I'm saying is like the media environment wasn't built for breaking news to occur over the web in the same way. And so you heard a lot of it over NFL Network if you had it, which at the time was definitely not a guarantee, or ESPN or something, right? And so it's just a lot less likely to happen. You'd hear a rumor, and those rumors would be ones that they'd be able to filter out a little bit, not for quality, but for impact. I think that led to 2 things. One is that there were just fewer people that were able to extract information from front offices and stuff like that. It didn't seem like every small thing that somebody would say would necessarily get blown up into a story. And so I think that general managers were maybe a little bit more comfortable with the long-standing relationships that they had with reporters to say something that would end up like in the newspaper, right? Which is, I guess, the other place, which I didn't even list it as the other place you hear a rumor. But I think the other thing is you're just hearing so many rumors because it's easier to spread them on social media, which I hate being like, well, it's because social media has, right? But like that's clearly a meteoric shift in the way that we consume news, and in this case, rumors. And I don't know that they're any more or less substantial, but like I think, and maybe there is something to that. Like I think that, like here's the thing, I hear a lot of things at the Combine and the Senior Bowl that I don't talk about a lot, or when I talk about it, I couch it in like very measured language, where I'm like, hey, I'm hearing from people who don't know anything that the Vikings like JJ McCarthy is like the way I would say it, right? Like, I don't know how much you could take this. Who knows? But like a lot of people will talk to a team scout who is an area scout, which is obviously they've got much more access than the person they're talking to, but they don't really have a lot of control over what the team does, right? They're in meetings and they help organize the draft board, but that actually hasn't even happened yet. It's February. We're at the Combine. They haven't had their meetings to go over positions, to go over which position coaches like, which guys the scouts also like. They didn't go over the building of the draft board. Very often, this happens a lot, they have these meetings and general managers give no indication of whether or not when a scout sticks up for his guy that it had any impact on them. And then they will, with a group of like 2 other people, construct their draft board in secret so that the scouts can't see it. And this usually occurs in April, weeks before the draft. They'll construct the draft board in secret and then have it in a locked room that the other scouts can't access. So when you get, and this doesn't happen in all organizations, there's a lot of organizations, especially now more than 10 years ago, but there's a lot of organizations where the scouts do get to see the draft board. But again, that occurs mostly in April. And so their sense for how the team or the general manager values a guy is like not really accurate. It's more accurate than maybe the journalist. Maybe it's even less, right? Because a journalist gets to hear from a bunch of different sources. But like, if you talk to a scout at the combine and they're like, our team, loves Drake May. How do you know? How does he know? Right? Panther scouts had no idea who the Panthers liked. They just didn't. Right? And so, like, when you heard a rumor like, the Panthers are really into CJ Stroud, did that come from, like Tepper's wife? Well, okay, then yeah, maybe I trust that more than I would trust a scout who scouted CJ Stroud, which is kind of weird, but that is more likely to have revealed information, right? And so I think that we're a little bit less critical of how we acquire information from people who seemingly have authority, and there's more people for them to talk to. So there's more of them that are talking and less like double checking and stuff like that. So I do think that the rumor quality has gone down a little bit. I do think that there's a process here where because there's more people seeking out rumors and people are like more careful and more willing to just like seed out a lie and whatever, that there's something there. But I think a lot of it is that we're just exposed to a ton of rumors because of social media, because we get news like 18 hours a day into our eyeballs. So it's just a little bit different. But I don't think the rumors that you read in the newspaper in 2007 were necessarily like any more accurate, because I remember like the 2011 draft about like the Panthers were like definitely taking Cam Newton. But like, I don't think, like, if you remember the 2011 draft, that was like an open question. Like, we actually were not as sure now as we were then that they were going to take Cam Newton, one of the greatest college quarterbacks of all time. And a lot of us were like, well, they'll probably take Blaine Gabbert. Your first pick, you're going to take Cam Newton? That's crazy. They're probably going to take Blaine Gabbert. Like, and there was like a rumor that the Panthers preferred Blaine Gabbert. Guys, that's just 4 years after the 2007 dead that you gave me. That wasn't any more reliable. That was wrong. The Vikings love Andy Dalton. Didn't pick him.
Nope, they didn't. I love the dumb rumors that like right now there's a bit of news going around Vikings Twitter about how the Redskins are absolutely going to be drafting a quarterback, and it's being treated as news as opposed to opinion. Like, it's that sort of thing
that bothers me. Oh my god,
it's that sort of thing that's exactly what he's talking about. Like, please just be done.
That's true, yeah. Especially when it's like ML football or increasingly Dove Kleiman or Jazz Riff. I don't know these aggregators, but like the ones that I don't like, because there's like aggregators that I think do a pretty good job. I think Ari Myrov, who's actually started, I believe, Breaking News, which is a good job, dude, that you've moved up to that, because he was mostly an aggregator before that. I think he does a good job. I think the NFL Beat Writers Twitter account, whoever owns that, I actually met one of the guys who runs it. I think they do a good job. There are aggregators that do a good job, but there's like aggregators that don't, and the ones that I just named don't. And they will, like you said, like Matt Schneidman was like, hey, I think Bakhtiari is not going to be a Packer. And they're like, hey, Matt Schneidman says the Bakhtiari is not going to be a Packer. Now, that turned out to be true because Matt Schneidman is a smart Packers beat reporter who had correctly deduced what was happening. But he never learned from a source that was happening. And it was reported as fact that, like, the Packers were going to cut him. And it's just constantly it's that, where like Alec Lewis is like, hey, I think the Vikings like Jaden Daniels. Maybe. I don't know. If I were the Vikings, I'd like him. And they were like, hey, the Vikings love Jaden Daniels. Holy crap. They will move heaven and earth for him. And it's like, what? What are you talking about? That's not what the thing said at all. Or like Charlie Walters will publish his like monthly column of news that I shouldn't say that he made up, but certainly does not tend to bear out very often. And an aggregator will be like, hey, here's what a Vikings beat reporter said. And it's like, that guy is not in the building. Like, what are you talking about?
Like, James is more of a Vikings beat reporter than this guy. Like,
yeah.
Making myself more important again. Oh. Uh, we're switching from more of a the mailbag is turned from the breakfast sandwich to the Big Mac at this point. So we're getting a little off topic. The pessimistic Minnesota sports fan asks, for a Reeves analysis corner, what did you think of the 2 quick whistles on Edwards during the first 2 minutes of yesterday's basketball game? Particularly the second fall the second fall against Flipowski on the block. Do you feel like that set the tone for the entire game, and such tight officiating was to JMU's disadvantage due to the fact that they had to reduce their defensive intensity, resulting in the Blue Devils' high shooting percentage? I feel like the fix was within the first 2 minutes.
Yeah, it certainly felt like there were a couple of bad fouls called that really set the tone for the game in terms of what JMU could expect from the referees, which really restricted, like you mentioned, their ability to engage in really intense physical defense, which is something that characterized how well they played against Wisconsin and generated such a high turnover rate. I just think that the way that the refs acted was dishonorable, and they revealed their intentions early. I will say I do have some light criticisms of how JMU handled that situation. That was not their fault. Again, that was the ref's fault. I don't know, because JMU plays such like physical man-to-man defense that I don't know that they're very good at switching. And when somebody leaves for a double team, someone else doesn't really know that now they've got 2 guys, or that suddenly the help defender has to now post up or whatever. Like, it just seems like they're not great on those rotations when they leave their man. And sometimes they're double teaming in a really backwards way. Like, they're behind the guy. Like, that's not useful. What are you doing? I don't know about the defensive rotations, but I do know that, like, physically, their bigs just were not able to play as physically as they could have. And against somebody like Filipowski, who is, I mean, the whole offense runs through Duke Center, right? Like, he was incredible. And I think the fact that they couldn't play him as tough as they normally would, I think played a pretty significant role in their 30-point loss. And I blame the refs entirely for them losing by 30 points.
Yeah.
It's their fault.
Well, Duke is just a dirty team anyway, so we can accept
Well,
that, move on, and enjoy them losing next game. Gaming Nerd Bolsharif asks, for Reeves, definitely don't watch Anime Corner. Which current Minnesota Viking is most like Goku? And who's the most like Vegeta, Krillin, Piccolo, and Gohan?
So news recently that Dragon Ball, I think we talked about this on another episode. There's a show called Dragon Ball or something like that. The creator, Akira Toriyama, passed away at the age of 68, which is young for Japanese people and old for people in his profession of drawing manga, which is nuts, and someone should look into that. There's a really that's crazy.
It
right?
is a thing.
This is true both, I believe, in animation and in the production of the comics, right? Again, I don't know anything about this, but there is a great video I've heard from a YouTuber named Mother's Basement on the passing of Akira Toriyama. Again, I can't watch it because it has to do with anime. And I definitely didn't just watch it 2 hours straight through with rapt attention, with tears in my eyes or anything like that. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't know what any of this means.
No.
But my understanding is that this is an incredible video that anybody with any taste in anime, which seems like an oxymoron, but let's work with it for a second, would highly, highly recommend watching. Goes into the insane impact that Toriyama had beyond, I think, even a lot of relatively casual anime fans, of which I'm not one, would go into, including the most popular anime in Japan at the time before Dragon Ball, which I didn't even know that he did had I watched it, or popularizing the poop emoji. The shape of that is him, I guess, allegedly, according to this video I didn't watch. And like 90 other small, enormous things, right? That he had just an enormous impact on, according to this video I didn't watch. Highly recommend it. Hugely impactful. again, from what I understand. Now, to answer this question about characters that I understand are from both, or are from Dragon Ball, except I guess Vegeta, I think is how you pronounced it, who I think is exclusively from Dragon Ball Z, which is a sequel, I think, series. Really quickly, Justin Jefferson, Goku, obviously, which would then, I think, answer, the rest of this group, which would make Jordan Addison Gohan, obviously father, son. And that would, because Piccolo is in a teacher spot, but also is in a rival spot, it was really tough, but it kind of just fits in with Keenan McCardell, who is a really good receiver and also is the receivers coach for Jordan Addison, because Piccolo is Gohan's real dad, obviously, right? That makes Krillin, who is canonically older than Goku, again, allegedly, according to sources, and also like kind of just not as important and gets like overshadowed a lot, but everyone like really likes him anyway, and is a lot better than a lot of the other bit characters. That would make Krillin Adam Thielen, right? Who in this scenario is dead. And I understand that Krillin dies like a couple of times. Don't know how that works. That makes Vegeta, who was evil and is now good, Aaron Jones. I don't really have to get into that too much, I think. So yeah, there's your answer according to rumors. I don't know how to continue the bit.
It's remarkable the amount of mental gymnastics that you go through for this.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Truly is spectacular. Need to get you a Crunchyroll subscription. Let's go.
What is that? Is that like Netflix?
Who knows? Like, I didn't even say that it was a streaming service. For all you know, it could have been a food.
You said subscription. I don't know.
For all you know, it could have been a food box thing. You seem to be going through them a lot lately. Let's wrap it up with Room Bolsharif, who asks, for James's relationship corner, I'm going to a singles event at a rock climbing place. What are some good rock climbing based pickup lines?
This is perfect for you. This is the ideal question for you, I think.
Why would this be perfect for me? I've basically been like bedridden the past 2 weeks doing the opposite of exercise.
Yeah, which means you've had a lot of time to come up with rock climbing based pickup lines. As one does when they have free time, like you did.
That is exactly what I did. And I absolutely did not put this into ChatGPT. Did not put this into ChatGPT at all, quite frankly. So the first one, are you a carabiner because I'm hooked on you?
Jesus Christ. Oh, God.
Are you a crux because you're the toughest part of my route, but I'm determined to conquer you?
Oh, that's a little effed up.
Well,
and a really elaborate. That doesn't deliver as a line. I'm sorry, ChatGPT. That one gets a C- at best.
Do you believe in love at first climb, or should I belay you again?
Okay, that's a Valentine's card. That's not a pickup line.
Yeah, well, I think the carabiner one is still. It's just so bad. If you were a route, you'd be rated 5.14, challenging but totally worth the effort.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's weird.
Look,
okay.
ChatGPT is only, if I were to have used it, is only good for so many things. But realistically, you know what? Let's refresh this. Let's regenerate this and see if we can get any better ones. Are you a top rope? Oh, Jesus.
Oh, no. Finish that one.
Are you a top rope route? Because I'd love to spend all day working on you. There. We have our winner.
That's way better than the other ones.
Thanks, ChatGPT, for providing us the answer of this one. That is truly spectacular. And with that, now that I've shown my lack of creativity, I'm going to ask for yours in a moment. Welcome to the end of this episode of Norse Code. If you guys have enjoyed it, we'll be back here in about 2 weeks or so with more analysis. Arif, I feel silly asking this, but what do you have to plug?
So I've got the Rise and Fall of the Draft Network, which details a story of really promising start, a bunch of exciting talent that fled to places like ESPN and The Ringer, and Pro Football Focus, and how a website with so much promise and so much talent ended up crumbling apart and becoming essentially irrelevant to the draft conversation, despite being a centerpiece of it 2 years ago. So check that out. Again, 12,000 words, carve out some time. I think that this is one of the best things that I've written in a while. And it was my I'm back Jordan moment. So there's that. But also, I've written a bunch of really good stuff, I think, over the past month. I think my piece on Jonathan Grenard that released today, as of this recording, Monday, about the weirdness of it, which I talked about a little bit on this show, turned into a piece for the Substack. I think that one's pretty good about kind of what it tells us about analytics. That's up. Check out my piece on Shaquille Griffin over his own coverage that I mentioned. Check out the Aaron Rodgers conspiracy piece that I mentioned. All of those have been a lot of fun to write, have been very successful. And then, of course, the piece Cousins Once Removed is kind of the goodbye-ish to Kirk Cousins, more of a reminiscing on his time in Minnesota. Really great month for the quality of the content at the Substack. Probably April is going to be bad, so you should probably just check in now and see what that is.
So don't eat them all at once. Just slowly.
Yeah. Just tease it out, right? Savor it.
All right. Well, again, we'll be back in about a week or two. So actually, I can announce this now. Next week, there will be our annual Patreon preview that will be coming out here. A little preview to everyone what you get on the Patreon side of things. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember to maybe put that in the garage next time. And we'll be back next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or at my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merch. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
Hey, all things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.